Hey, it's Al Angelo from A Plus Racing. Yeah, that joker on Facebook. Yeah, that Facebook thing is causing all kinds of problems. Anyhow, hey, I'm making this video for Ryan Pagan because he tore his first engine apart and he posted a bunch of pictures, and man, it's just like this outpouring of people chiming in. So I'm going to set the record straight on what you're looking for, things to check out when you're checking out your engine after you tore it apart. And this is for my buddy Ryan Pagan. All right, first thing I see you guys doing, you're like, and I don't have it set up on the crankshaft here, but come on in close. I want to show you this. So you guys have this setup right here, okay? And you're like, I can't get this off. And I see all kinds of stuff of people trying to get how they're going to get this thing off. And the heat one, yeah, if you heat it up a little bit, you can get this gear off of here, all right? I'll tell you what I do. And what I do is very carefully, without breaking it, is I pry up on both sides with a straight screwdriver, okay? Now, this thing doesn't sit flush against there. So, Mike, if you can get him real close down there, it doesn't sit down like this. It actually sits up a little ways. And then what I use then is I use a crow's foot, okay? So I get a crow's foot underneath it on both sides. So these are what crow's feet look like, okay? All right, so this is a crow's foot, okay? So I get a couple of crow's feet on both sides, and I work that gear off without breaking it. If you break this, okay, you can't reuse it, all right? If you break the lip on here, don't try reusing it because what it does is it cuts the timing belt, all right? So if you bust it, you're going to have to get another one, all right? So this will slowly walk off, okay? Now, I'm going to put this in a direction that you would be looking at it. So you'd be looking at it like this. The next step that I see you guys are constantly asking questions on. Well, how do I replace the seal? Okay, so I'm going to show you my trick of how I get the seal out in the car, okay, and I replace it. So, and this is a very common part that leaks, and then you end up having oil leaking out the front, and it goes all over everything. All right, so I know this is not bolted to the engine, and I'm going to have a little trouble because it's not bolted, but I want to show you what I do. So the way that I get it out is I just go up here to the seam, all right, and I lightly tap in my straight screwdriver, okay, and then I just pop it out like that, okay, and there, it's out. Now, if you notice that I put just a little scratch right here, I would rather have the scratch here than down here, because when I have it here, it doesn't leak. When I do it down here, it leaks, okay? So what I do when I put the new seal in, and I didn't scratch it that deep, it's pretty minimal. I could scuff that up a little bit. And sometimes I'll put just a real light coat of silicone around the outside of this. And then when I go to put this in, I just want it to be flush. This is not the best hammer. I just want it to be flush with the aluminum. Like that, okay? And I would also put grease on this, you know, before I put that on there, okay? So that's how the easiest way to get this off. You put a little scratch up here, it's not going to leak. Put a little silicone there, you'll be fine, okay? So if the pump was off, I could knock it out from here and get it out like that, okay? Okay. But if I had the pump off, to tell you the truth, what I'd be doing, I'd be replacing the pump. The pump is $100, okay? Anytime I have it off, I just replace them. I see people in there say, oh yeah, you know, you could take it apart and clean it and measure it off. You know, you could. $100? Yeah. Just get rid of it, all right? Okay, that's enough for that. All right, let's talk about Ryan's engine parts, okay? So Ryan shows us some bearings, and his bearings look a lot like this one, okay? There's nothing wrong with that bearing, all right? This bearing is in perfect shape, okay? You got 190,000 miles on an engine, you pull that out and it looks like that, dude, that motor was running good. Somebody kept the oil clean on it. They changed the oil. They took care of it, all right? I love seeing engines come apart that look like that because they're going to make great race engines for me, okay? Now, I also stated on his Facebook comment that if you had a bad rod bearing, that it could also be seen on the top of the piston. And I got a bunch of people, and I'm not mentioning any names, you can look and see who they are, but that said, oh no, you don't know what you're talking about, that's not true. And so it is true. And I told you I would show you a picture. if you look at this piston right here, okay, you see this, how this line is straight across right here, and how the aluminum is different colored than the gold one here. And for the lesser extent, the same on this side, this piston spun a rod bearing, okay? And when it did, what happens is the clearance gets greater in between here and the rod. The piston gets thrown up on the upstroke, and it extends out, and it kisses the top of the head, and then it is forced downward. So when you spin a rod bearing like that, the piston kisses the head. And if you also notice on this rod, you can see where the heat was because the bearing was destroyed. And so what ended up happening is this surface, as rough as it looks, was riding on the crankshaft journal, okay, because the bearing was gone, all right? So that gives it extra clearance, and so somebody commented, oh, the piston could never hit the top of the head. It can. If you were to actually put a Miata engine together without a head gasket and bolt the head on, the engine will only turn halfway and then lock up because the piston comes up out of the block a little bit and it's going to hit the head. Ask me how I know. I mean, I got hundreds of these engines, and the kids take them apart every year. Do they ever leave the head gasket off? All the time. All right, so they leave the head gasket off, and they go, Mr. Angelo, our engine won't turn over. And I go, did you put a head gasket in there? Yeah. Well, why is it sitting over there? Okay? I get that all the time. That's how I know that an engine won't turn if it doesn't have a head gasket. That's how close this clearance is. So it is really close. And while I got this pistons here, let me teach you a little bit about pistons. This piston here is out of a 1.6, all right? So I can tell for a couple ways. One, it's a lot smaller than a 1.8. And two, do you see how it's dished? So it's kind of like it's sunken in right here. This is a low compression piston, all right? So this piston here runs a little bit lower compression than the 1.8, all right? So a 1.8 piston from 94 to 98 is basically flat on top, okay? So that is a 1.8, 94 to 98. And then on the 99s, you can see it's raised here a little bit, all right? So this is up a little more. This is a 9.5 to 1 compression ratio, okay? So it's raised a little bit more. So that's how I can tell when I'm looking at an engine, you know, what size engine I'm looking at. So, you know, if we look at this one right here, we can see it's raised right here. So we know that comes out of a 99, all right? Now, you can. You're subscribing, right? You can put 99 pistons in an earlier 1.8, okay, 94 to 97. And when you do that, you increase the compression ratio and you get way more performance out of it. It's against the rules of Spec Miata, man. Don't make me catch you at the racetrack running 99 pistons in a 94 car. You can, and I have, okay? And you can make a lot more power out of them by just running a stock 99 piston in a 94 to 97. So there is what the differences look like. You can see it's ever so slight, but boy, I tell you, what a difference and smile on your face when you run these pistons on an early 1.8. Okay, some other things about what to look for when I'm taking engine apart. Since we got the pistons here, let me show you. All right, if you notice on the side of this piston, I can see plenty of black-brown corrosion all along down the side of the piston. And if I look at this one, I don't see any, okay? And if I look at this one, I see very little, all right? And I look at this one, and I don't see any. The reason the problem here is this piston has worn out rings, okay? So what's happening is a lot of our power that we're supposed to be compressing the air-fuel mixture up here is seeping past the rings, and it's catching on fire, and it's blowing past the piston, okay? So we're losing power. So this engine needed to be rebuilt because the rings are wore out. When I look at this one, I can see there's no indication, and I see everything that is burnt is pretty much above the ring line. So that tells me this one was burning pretty good. Now I do notice a lot of oil on the top. This one had a problem with the head, okay? So something going on with the valve stem seals or the valves or something like that, because there is a lot of sufficient oil burning up here, but it's not going down the side, so it's telling me it's not for the rings, okay? All right, so now my buddy says, well, look at my crankshaft. What do you think about my crankshaft? Hey, you know, I saw that crank and it wasn't bad. So let me show you some problem cranks and cranks that have no problem. All right, so first off, let's do a lesson on 1.6 crankshafts and 1.8 crankshafts. All right, so if I look at this crankshaft. Now, unfortunately, I got all of these bolts in here on the back of them, but you would see that a 1/6 crank is shorter than a 1/8 crank. Let me grab another one. Here we go. Okay. All right. This is a 1/6 crank. This is a 1/8 crank. So when people, oh yeah, the crankshafts are the same. No, the only thing that's same is the bearings. All right. So this crankshaft is shorter than this crankshaft. Hey, there's another thing about difference in these crankshafts. Check it out. This crankshaft is a cast crankshaft. Okay. See this seam right here? This is a casted crankshaft. You notice the color of the crank. Look at the color and the difference in this crank. This is a forged crank. That's right. Mazda put forged cranks in all of the 1/8 cars, but they didn't put them in the 1/6 cars, okay? This is the crankshaft to have, and it came with it, all right? It came with the forged crank already. This is a cast crank. All right. So when I'm looking at a crankshaft, the first thing that I'm looking for is I'm looking at the journals, okay? The journal is the surface that the bearing rides on, and there are two of them. There is a rod journal here, and there's a main journal here. So these are rods on the outside, rod journals, and then all the ones lined up down the center here, 5 of them, are main journals, okay? Those are the main bearings. So I'm looking to see how pristine the crankshaft looks, if there's any scratches or scuffs or anything like that. As you can see from this forged 1.8 crankshaft, it's in cherry condition, all right? This crankshaft is absolutely perfect, all right? So that one's really good. Let's look at this 1/6 crank, okay? So, and I can tell it's a 1/6 crank. I look at it, I can see it's 1/6. It's also smaller. It's got the studs on, so that's why it looks taller. If you look right here on this journal's hammered, okay? You can see the heat discoloration here. This journal is wiped out. This one here, all black, spun a bearing here also. This one here. So this crankshaft obviously had lack of oil in multiple places, and that probably because the bearings went bad, and the bearings probably went bad because it had some kind of oiling problem. And so this had 3 bad rods in it and had 1 good one. So is this crankshaft garbage? Do we have to throw it away? No. You could send this crankshaft out to a machine shop, and they could have this crank restored, refurbished, what we call turned. We could have this crankshaft turned, and they would bring this back to good condition again, and this could be a good crank. And don't forget that video I showed you on how to clean the crankshaft once you get it back, okay? You should always be squirting these little holes out with brake clean. I got a video on that shows you exactly why we're doing that, okay? So it is against the Spec Miata rules for you to modify any of this, okay? Somebody's like, oh, you're doing it wrong, Al. You got to like put a plug in there. You got to drill this hole out and grind it out and you can't do that. You're not allowed to modify anything on the crankshaft in the Spec Miata. If you're not racing Spec Miata, go for it. Do it. But in my world, everything is doing in Spec Miata. We're not allowed to do that. So I'm showing you the way I do it. That is legal if you're going to be racing the car, okay? All right. So inspecting the crankshaft, I'm looking for perfectly pristine, shiny surfaces that don't have any nicks or scratches in it. If I had some very minor scratches in it, I could get some crocus cloth. Don't use emery cloth or steel wool or anything. Crocus cloth is made for polishing up crankshaft. It just might have some very minimal imperfection, okay? It's not going to take out a gouge or metal transfer. I would clean it up a little bit. I would still squirt out all of the oil passageways to make sure that they're cleaned out. I want to make sure that I still have a good keyway right here because that's a problem with some of our crankshafts. Let's see if I got one here. It's got a bad keyway. As you see, I do these engines all the time, and I have tons of them. All right. Here's a crankshaft that's got a wobbled out keyway. All right. It's a 1/6. And so that's a problem right there. Also, too, let me see if I have a short nose. Oh, all right, here's one. So the big question on Facebook is, well, how do I know I got a short nose or how do I know I got a long nose? So you see how thick this is right here? Okay, that's a long nose. Do you see how narrow this section right here, and this also got a wobbled out keyway. See how narrow this is? This is a short nose. This crankshaft is basically unbuildable. I can't find oil pumps for them, nor do I want to. They were riddled with problems. So anytime I build an engine, I always go back to a long nose crank, and I just get rid of these. I don't. They're unreliable. So if you got one of these, I'm sorry. You stuck with it. I got it. But anytime I build an engine, I always go back to a long nose. You have to change the oil pump and the harmonic balance for some of the parts up at the front. But this is what a short nose crankshaft looks like, and this is what a long nose. And both of these have bad keyways. Okay. I'm sure somebody out there is fixing the keyways. I haven't found them yet. I have enough. I probably have 40 of these engines. I have enough of these engines and parts that I'm not desperate to have to fix these. So I just hang on to them and the kids play with them. All right. Let's see. Did I run out of parts? Okay. So here's a crankshaft that came out of a car. And maybe we'll use this as the test. Okay. Is this a long nose or a short nose? Okay, well, this is a long nose, all right? And so is this a 1/8 or a 1/6? Well, let's see. Okay. All right. So it is a forged crankshaft, okay? And it's a taller one, so this is a 1/8. So now we just pulled this out of a car, and what I'm looking for is I can see very minute scratches on this journal, okay? And on this one here, pretty nice. This main, very nice. This one here, some minor scratches on there. I can see some minor ones. So this crankshaft is in pretty good shape, all right? And so what I could do with this crankshaft, and this is a standard crank. I know some of you guys are like, I gotta have that. I gotta have it. Because they're really hard to find. So, and it's got a good keyway in it. I could have this polished, okay? And I know, Spec Miata, you say you couldn't polish it. Yeah, we're not allowed to port and polish anything. We can polish the crankshaft to make it to where we could still use a standard bearing and that we clean the surface up. And it's not as expensive as having the crankshaft turned. So sometimes I do have them polished. In this case, with this crankshaft, being that it's standard, this crankshaft's worth a lot of money, is that I would probably have it polished, or I would clean it up with some crocus cloth myself, clean it all up. I would still clean out the passageways before I built it, because I don't want to have to rebuild the engine again, okay? So we're looking for scratches in the crankshaft. We're also looking on this journal right here is where my thrust bearings glide right here. So this surface and this surface, I want to make sure that those surfaces are good, because if the thrust bearing goes bad, then it eats the crankshaft up here. All right. Here's one other tip. I know I could go on for hours on this. That's how much I know about these. When you start up the car first thing in the morning and you push the clutch in and you start it up, the clutch is pushing on the crankshaft. It's pushing it forward. And when you start it up, it doesn't have any lubrication. So you push in the clutch and you start it, the engine starts up and it's turning. It's very minimal lubrication on that back thrust bearing because you're pushing on it with the clutch. So it's always a good idea to like start the car. You have to push the clutch in, and then put the car in neutral and let the clutch out and then let it warm up. Otherwise, you could start eating up the thrust bearing, and then you're going to end up, it's going to make all kinds of racket, knocking, and stuff like that. I didn't see his crankshaft on the Facebook post, but could have a bad thrust bearing. I didn't get to see that picture. Okay. All right. I know it's a lot of information in a short period of time, and it's my lunch hour, and I'm damn hungry. So I'm going to try to get something to eat. But I wanted to bring this video to you to try to help clear up exactly why I say these comments that I say. You got to trust me. I know what I'm doing with these cars. But I'm always open for learning. So you got something, I say, well, show me how you did it. I'm serious, man. Make a video, show me, because my mind is an open mind. I don't know everything about Miatas. I know a lot about them, but I'm always willing to learn something new or learn something that'll make my cars more reliable and faster, because that's what I do. I rent out Spec Miatas, all right? Hey, I'm glad that you guys chimed in for this. I enjoy the comments on Facebook. I hope that this helps clear up some of the confusion, and I hope this helps out my buddy on Facebook. Hey, I'll see you at the racetrack. Bye now.